Broadcasting live from the Business Radio X studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for Atlanta Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome to this very special edition of Atlanta Business Radio. We are broadcasting live today from Georgia State University, their Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute. Lee, we're kind of hitting our stride, man. We got an episode under our belt. That was a lot of fun. We caught up with some old friends, starting to make some new ones. This is going to be a fun segment, though. What do you think?
Absolutely.
All right. Please join me in welcoming to the broadcast. First up in this episode, Aziz Hashim, Professor of Franchising Entrepreneurship, Mr. Ben Lawrence. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me today.
Well, Ben, before we get too far into things, being a professor of franchising entrepreneurship is an interesting specialty. How did that come about, and why should entrepreneurs consider franchising?
Well, I moved to Atlanta last year because we have a benefactor, Aziz Hashim, who gave a professorship in franchising here at Georgia State. So I moved from Cornell. My expertise is in franchising. And Atlanta is an amazing place to do research and teach franchising. Atlanta is home to 70-plus franchise-based businesses, including Rourke Capital, who owns such brands as Arby's, Naf Naf Grill, 30-plus brands where we can get those individuals into the classroom, engage with the students. You know, franchising is a really unique type of entrepreneurship. It's a relationship where a individual connects with a brand, is an independent owner of those outlets, but uses the power of the brand to drive customer traffic.
Now, tell me a little bit about how franchising became something you study at school. Like, what's that like for the student who's going through this? Is this a class that a potential franchisee or franchisor would go through? Like, what do you learn in that class?
Well, I will say that any student in a business school should be studying franchising. It comprises, up to 40% of retail sales. So in our class, what we talk about is, the basics of the franchise model. We talk about, the business model itself, how to select a franchise you might be interested in. If you're interested in franchising your business, kind of what businesses fit with franchising. It's really it's a broad spectrum of students, even students outside the business school. So if you're interested in social entrepreneurship, for example, if you're interested in building a franchise that could do good, develop a franchise that would, for example, give better access to healthcare in Africa. There's a lot of, franchising can be applied to any business. It's not just restaurants and hotels, which is a large segment of the franchise-based business. It's in healthcare with such brands like The Joint, in chiropractic care, Massage Envy, any type of business you can franchise. And if you're in business, the chances are you will be interacting with a franchise-based business sometime during your work. You might be selling them something, technology. It really doesn't matter what type of student you are. Understanding this fundamental business relationship is essential.
Now, when you talk about fundamental business relationship, is part of what you're going to learn is when you have a business, whether it's a franchise or not a franchise, some of the core things that you get out of a franchise, this operator's manual, this systemization of activities, those are all skills that transfer whether you're a franchise or not, right? There's some basic ways of doing business that just make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, franchising, having a franchise business isn't really that different than having a regular business, right? You have to understand the business model. And so what I teach the students is to understand the business model, you have to do quite a lot of research before getting into that relationship. This is a long-term relationship. So, my students, they do some research on franchise-based business they're interested in. They build a business case around why that franchise would work in the Atlanta area or outside the Atlanta area, and then they kind of do due diligence around, will that business model work? Is it scalable? Because many times, if you have a franchise-based business, you just don't want to have one. You want to have two or three, or maybe a portfolio of franchise-based businesses. So, the class is really about applying, understanding the benefits of franchising. So understanding what you're getting out of that, and knowing when to say no, I'm not interested in that franchise, and when that there is a great opportunity for that.
Now, let's look at an individual that's considering purchasing a franchise or going that route rather than starting something from scratch. Is there, like, if I like ice cream, should I look at ice cream franchises? Like, what are some of the attributes of a good franchise for someone, and how do I kind of assess what's right for me?
So first of all, you got to understand, what the investment is. So the size of the investment you need to make. So if you want to, for example, become a hotel franchisee, that's a quite sizable investment. If you want to own a smaller restaurant franchise, it's a smaller investment. At the same time, if you have a small investment, you're not going to make $1 million out of that every year. Mm-hmm. So understanding kind of what is the investment, what are you going to get out of that business, and in order to make what you need to make to survive, how many of those outlets do you need? Now, I would say that if you have a passion for the business, it's obviously that's the best case scenario, right? If you have passion about pizza, then I would say you're more likely to be successful if you have passion about the business. And so, understanding who owns that business, who owns a franchise, is it a private equity firm, is it a founder? Those are very important things you got to understand. And what I would say is the one piece of advice I give all franchisees, potential franchisees, is to talk to other franchisees. If you want to become a Subway franchisee, go out and talk to a bunch of Subway franchisees and see what their lifestyle is like. And if you like that lifestyle, if you see something that you like in that, then that's probably a pretty good indicator whether or not you can be successful in that business. But I would say I caution a lot of franchisees, don't make rash decisions. Right, you've got time to make those decisions. Do due diligence and find the contract, the franchise disclosure document. Contact franchisees, understand what you're getting into, and take your time. And get a financial advisor, get a franchise lawyer to look over the documents before you sign anything, because this is a long-term commitment. That can be very rewarding. At the same time, it can be also very stressful because you're signing a contract.
Now, as a franchisee, it doesn't necessarily mean some franchises aren't built on me doing the work, right? Some franchises are built of me owning a bunch of them and hiring other people to be the manager and running the day-to-day operations, right? That's a choice also in the franchise world.
Absolutely, and it depends on the brand. Some brands allow that, and some brands require you to be an owner-operator. So a lot of my students are interested, for example, in Chick-fil-A. It's a great, iconic brand based in Atlanta. But that Chick-fil-A's franchise contract is very unique. You're not going to be able to own, multiple outlets. The franchisor has a lot of control over that relationship because of the structure of that relationship. So you really have to understand what the franchisor wants. So there's other brands that require you to own 5. To sign a contract that requires you to open a number of outlets. Which is a much more a multi-unit strategy. And I would say the multi-unit strategy is one that's growing. There's more and more franchisors looking for large multi-unit operators that own 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 of these outlets because they tend to be a little more sophisticated. But there are still brands out there that require you to be an owner-operator. So if you're, for example, a doctor and you want to invest in a franchise brand to kind of you have excess money that you want to invest in that, some brands won't allow you to do that, because you have to actually be in the store, operating that store. There's just so many different types of models in franchising. So really understand if that fits your lifestyle.
Now, how does a typical person even become aware of all of the different choices there are?
So there's publications out there that obviously rank kind of the fastest growing franchise-based businesses, the newest franchise-based businesses. Franchise Times, for example, is a whole magazine kind of allocated around franchising. It's really important for you to do your due diligence and kind of look around and see. Just because a franchise-based business has been around a long time doesn't mean it's a bad investment, doesn't mean it's a good investment. Just because a franchise is growing very rapidly doesn't mean that it's a great investment. Curves, for example, is one of the fastest growing franchise-based businesses. Curves, a fitness franchise. It also declined very rapidly. So you've really got to understand that the environment's changing very rapidly as well. If you think of a company like Blockbuster. Blockbuster was a franchise.
That was a franchise?
Yeah. So, I mean, can you imagine one day you own 50 Blockbusters and
Right.
you're just running around happy as anything, and then all of a sudden...
What's this Netflix thing I'm reading about?
Exactly. And technology is rapidly changing. So, we have, automated driving, which might impact certain franchise-based businesses out there. And if you're signing a 10-year contract or a 15-year contract, you've really got to think about what services you're offering the consumer, and will those services be there 10 years from now?
So what's your backstory? Were you involved in franchising, or how'd you get into academics of franchising?
So I have a bachelor's degree in hospitality. I worked in the industry for a while. I've never been a franchisee. But, Georgia State is a Tier 1 research institution, so they're really interested in individuals that do research in franchising. Mm-hmm. So I went and get my doctoral degree at Boston University, my PhD. My thesis was on franchising. So that's how I kind of got into this unique relational form. And from an academic standpoint, it's really interesting because there's all these incentive structures at play. The franchisor's interested in increasing sales, the franchisee is interested in profits, and that creates a lot of interesting tensions that you can study from a theoretical standpoint. So my job at Georgia State, one of my primary jobs is doing research around franchising. So one of the interesting questions I'm looking at now is kind of the larger you are as a franchisee, the more units you have, how does that impact whether or not you will comply with what the franchisor says? So, for example, if you have 100 Pizza Huts, are you less likely to comply with what the franchisor wants you to do because you have a lot of power in that relationship? So a lot of my time is spent doing research. My parents always ask me, my parents never went to college, and they, I teach a franchising course here at Georgia State once a week on Wednesdays, and they, what do you do with all your time? Ben, right? They don't understand. I mean, I spend, I would say 75% of my time doing research. And as Georgia State's, primarily a research institution, a Tier 1 research institution, that's what, professors do here.
Now, for you, when you're doing this kind of research, and part of it is the weight of 100 franchise, there's a lot of franchises that have that, where there are some franchisees that have a disproportionate amount. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing them having undue influence or spinning off and wanting to do things their way and creating a tension that impacts the franchise as a whole? I
think that there's definitely outlets out there that have a lot of large multi-unit operators. Pizza is one of those, and I think the research that I'm doing right now shows that there is some tension around compliance around certain issues, especially when the franchisee doesn't think it's in their best interest. But then again, it's the franchisor relationship is one in which the franchisor is interested in increasing sales, and the franchisee is really interested in the bottom line, which is profitability. And so there's an inherent tension there. And so you're always going to have tension in that relationship. The most important thing is for the franchisor to understand that they can't be successful unless their franchisees are successful. And, there are certain brands that, have really suffered because of that. Quiznos is one of those. Right, we have one of the Quiznos on Broad Street here, but Quiznos closed a lot of their outlets. And one reason for that was that they didn't leave enough money on the table for their franchisees. But there's a lot of really interesting questions around doing research in franchising because of this unique relational form.
Now, is there any data about if a person was going to be an entrepreneur and they want to go just do their own thing kind of as an independent versus being a franchisee, you're much more likely for success being a franchisee, or what's kind of the rate of success in each? I would say, that there's limited academic research in this area because it's very hard to know what a failure is in a franchise, because if you close that outlet, it could reopen again with another franchisee, and is that failing or is that so it's difficult to ascertain. What I can say is that the academic research so far has really not shown that much of a difference. Which might be surprising. Well, it's surprising. I mean, one thing you've got to think of, too, is that in a franchise relationship, there's a lot of contractual things that require you to, for example, stay open all the time, right? When that might not be the best interest in certain areas. In your market, right? So,
the economy changes very rapidly, and then franchisees have to adapt. And in that type of environment, an independent operator might be able to adapt quicker. There are some also issues around, to become a franchisee, you have to go through a certain process to become, approved to be a franchisee, which then creates some self-selection issues around doing that type of research. You can't the way to really investigate that would be randomly assign someone to be a franchisee or independent operator,
right?
Which really is not feasible. So there's a lot of issues around that research. But I would say that the assumption that you're going to become a franchisee and you're going to be more successful as a franchisee than an independent operator is probably not the right assumption, because as a franchisee, you still have to drive your business.
Right, and that's another misconception. I think that people think that they just buy this and then business, build it and they will come, but you have to still work the market and kind of market and do the...
Absolutely. It's all about the individual franchisee.
Right.
And the franchisor, it's not a fiduciary relationship, right? The franchisor is not responsible for your failure or your success. They're giving you the opportunity in terms of representing the brand, but it's not as if, you're going to succeed or fail based on just that relationship.
And in your work, are more and more students coming to this class, and are they more and more interested? Are you seeing it trending in more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the students, they don't really know what to expect. They don't really understand what franchising is. They think that the franchising is all about becoming a Subway franchisee, and it's much broader than that. And so I think when the students come in, they see guest speakers come in that are in a range of businesses. And after they leave the class, they're like, wow, this is a really broad field that really has applications in many different types of businesses. So, yeah, definitely the exposure's growing here at Georgia State around franchising. Good
stuff. Well, hang with us. We got more guests. Next up on this show is Jeff Graybeal. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Tell us about your work as a clinical assistant professor here at the E&I program at Georgia State.
So I teach the core entrepreneurial classes, E&I 3101, Entrepreneurial Thinking for Startups, and E&I 3102. And so students take our core classes, and then they can specialize in electives or others like the franchising entrepreneurship, as well as social entrepreneurship and media entrepreneurship. And like Ben, I do research. That's part of my job as a professor here. My background is more in the media entrepreneurship realm, but I teach the basic entrepreneurship courses here.
So now, when you came to this program, where did you see franchising, or was that even on your radar?
No, franchising wasn't on my radar when I came here. Again, media was sort of my background, media entrepreneurship. But in general, Atlanta is such a ecosystem for entrepreneurship that it supports all sorts of things, all sorts of areas. Atlanta is very fortunate to have a support system here with places like Atlanta Tech Village, with corporations that support franchising entrepreneurship and elsewhere.
So now in your work in media entrepreneurship, what does that entail?
My background is more from the scholarly perspective. So again, I've done academic research looking into things like best practices in crowdfunding, best practices in pitch persuasion. With that, I developed a micropayment model that looked at drivers for small amounts of content online. So that's kind of my background, looking at the academic side of scholarship into entrepreneurship pertaining to media.
Now, when you were, what attracted you to the Georgia State's Entrepreneurship Institute?
Again, so...
is it the research element? I mean, that seems to be a big part of what's happening here at Georgia State.
Yeah, research and location. Georgia State is a Tier 1 university, like Ben mentioned, and it is on the rise in terms of facilities. Right next door is the Creative Media Industries Institute. I know you spoke with those folks earlier in the year. It's a really nice facility for things like virtual reality, augmented reality. Atlanta, of course, with all they've done in the film industry. I'm from North Carolina originally, so that kind of hurts to see North Carolina, putting down studios and tax incentives. But I'm glad that Georgia and Atlanta filled that void by providing those tax incentives and studios that came here to.
Did North Carolina pause their tax credit? Like what?
They significantly reduced it. It was they were at one time known as kind of Wilmywood. They called it for Wilmington.
Wilmington was a lot of
the Hollywood of the South.
there.
Yep. And they scaled back their amount of the fund that they invested in it significantly.
At the same time, Georgia increased theirs?
Pretty much, yeah. The same 10-year period.
So you're a research person. You tell me any cause and effect there?
There's definitely some correlation from a tax incentive perspective. I mean, if you talk to the businesses, they'll tell you part of the reason that they located studios. And in fact, Screen Gems has a studio in Wilmington and opened a studio here as well in Atlanta. So, those are certain things that support.
So why didn't North Carolina just turn it back on?
They increased the fund where it was a little bit amount, but every year they have to it's a legislative political issue.
So they don't want the business?
They want the business. It's just the political will declined and the funding wasn't there.
Wow.
And once it's gone, it's gone.
That's fascinating. So tell us about your recent trip to Portugal.
Yeah, so with my academic service, I'm the immediate head of the Media Management, Economics, and Entrepreneurship Division of an organization called AEJMC. Has about 200 faculty around the world, about a quarter of those internationally, that are involved in that division. And so I was very honored to recently be invited to Portugal, where I attended the University of Porto and the University of Lisbon, and gave a talk on entrepreneurship, management, and marketing in creative industries. So I was invited to give this seminar lecture to these graduate students at these two universities, where I was able to sort of share the story of Atlanta as part of that, talking about Atlanta's entrepreneurial ecosystem, talking about the rise of the film industry and the Creative Media Industries Institute and the kind of things we're doing here in Atlanta on a world stage. And Lisbon itself in Portugal is a top 5 city for entrepreneurship in Europe. Berlin is kind of one of the leading areas, but Portugal is on the rise, and part of that is the Eurocentric nature. A lot of folks there speak English, and again, tax incentives and industries that locate there that help support that. So that was quite an honor. I brought back a little bit of a cold from Portugal as well, as you can probably hear with my voice, but I enjoyed that trip very much.
So now, what is your take on the Atlanta entrepreneurial ecosystem? Now, there's a lot of universities. There's a lot of businesses now, especially you mentioned Tech Village. That's an example of an entrepreneur who exited and is investing back in the entrepreneurial community. Are you bullish? You see a lot of opportunity here?
So some of the research I've done, as well as others, really highlight the importance of town-gown relations. So the universities here with others working on developing an ecosystem. There's a Professor Eisenberg who has looked at criteria for creating an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Includes things like policy, finance, developing a culture, having support, having markets, and having human capital. So that's where, Ben was talking earlier about having a lot of corporations here and a culture that supports franchise entrepreneurship. So you see a culture that supports entrepreneurship across Atlanta. That's one of the things where our research also can connect to our classroom. So I encourage our students actually have an assignment that requires them to go to the Atlanta, whether it's Atlanta Tech Village or one of our events at E&I. So they have to get out in the community and go to one of these events and write about it. So having Atlanta Tech Village, having Constellations, having the Microsoft Innovation Center here in walking distance from Georgia State, all of these things fuel the rise of an ecosystem for entrepreneurship that supports it. So we've been very fortunate the location, and that's, to your earlier question, one of the reasons I'm here and wanted to come to Atlanta and Georgia State was that location and the being around all of these resources. Previously, I was in West Texas developing the entrepreneurial ecosystem there, and Lubbock had a lot of things going for it, but the location was very remote, and they kind of hit above their class for where they're at. But 5-6 hours from Austin, whereas Atlanta has the airport, has all of the resources that help support that. And going back to the earlier thing I wanted to mention, the pipeline with the university, it's important to have things that keep students here. Quality students that come here may take our classes, may do a side hustle, may start a venture. And if they're from elsewhere, they may leave and go back to their current home or wherever. And we want to do things like have cooperative working spaces, have incentives that keep them and help them help grow their business so that they can stay here. So programs like ATDC, university programs at Georgia Tech, Georgia State, all of our our students take part in these things, that's really important to help grow entrepreneurship. Georgia State has a wonderful program, but we alone can't do it. Georgia Tech has a wonderful program, but Georgia Tech alone can't do it. It's these partnerships and having places that students, after they graduate, can, grow and scale their business and have access to resources like capital and mentoring and things of that nature.
So now, is part of your work to kind of define some of the components of a healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem so it can be replicated and scaled and maybe placed in other places to help fuel growth there?
Yeah, the thing that's interesting about entrepreneurial ecosystems is Eisenberg and others tell you, first off, don't be the next Silicon Valley. They all want to be the next Silicon Valley. And, places like New York and Berlin even have what they call Silicon Alley for media places and tech startups. So on one hand, they suggest that it should grow organically, but on the other hand, you have these things where the government, with tax policies, with financials, with markets, and someone like Steve Case, the founder of AOL, talks about the rise of the rest. You have all of the venture capital in California and New York, but he's saying that through things like crowdfunding and others, and Atlanta is growing with that the next wave of startups that we can invest in are not going to be in these top two cities, are going to be elsewhere. And part of that is having, again, partnerships and commitment to help grow that. So that's part of one of the things I look at is what can help grow and support entrepreneurial ecosystems, and it's that fusion. And then increasingly seeing areas that have specialized ecosystems as well, like an ecosystem to support franchise entrepreneurship. There's very few that focus on media entrepreneurship ecosystems. New York is one of those because they actually take the tax credits and the funding from the mayor's office for film and television. They take that money and flow it into a consortium of 18 universities for a program called New York City Immediate Media Lab. So they're actually taking the film and television credit and funding that into a research partnership of universities and startups that are working together collaboratively. So a place like Atlanta could do something along those lines, right? With the film industry here, with the music industry here, playing to our strengths. So this was a question they asked in Portugal was, what do you mean? What's this contrast about growing organically versus supporting something? And I said, the example is, West Texas has a very vibrant music scene, but it's a certain type of music history, Buddy Holly and country and Western roots. You couldn't take trap music, for example, which has a rich history here in Atlanta, and plant that and expect it to grow in West Texas. It probably wouldn't work. So there's lots of things that can be done to support an ecosystem, and our academic research helps support that and studies that as well. Some questions.
So is that the lesson, is that you take what the region or the area has, like its superpower, strength, or special sauce, and then you use some of these initiatives that are successful in other markets and then kind of just plug and play it into what already exists and then grow out from there?
Yeah, that's part of it. Part of it's still being told. I mean, also like with North Carolina, as we talked about earlier, don't rest on your laurels, right? And that's a message for Atlanta. Don't rest on your laurels.
Right.
So continue those tax incentives and continue to promote it. One of the criticisms of Atlanta, they'll argue that Atlanta doesn't have a film industry. It has a film production industry. It's still lacking and, can develop further in terms of talent and other areas of specialty. So the production studios are here, but you still are having to go to California to pitch. You're still having to, get The Walking Dead is kind of a joke in that like 90% of the actors for some reason are British, right? They all come here and they're all British on the show. So we're importing that talent from overseas.
But isn't that the same thinking of Silicon Valley kind of centric, where I have to go there to get VC money, but it's slowly coming where this is growing an area, and the film will probably be the same thing over time, I would imagine, if we can keep the studios here.
Yep, and that's where it comes back to the university pipeline. So I can't tell you the number of students that I have that are interested in music or film or music production. I know you had Robert Hatcher here earlier in the semester talking about Sound Collide. We have lot of student talent here that is interested, that are artists, that are producers, and a lot of related talent in terms of the film industry as well. And part of that they're here is because of the location. You know, every week we get notifications about there's been filming here in this building in 55 Park, and all around us. So we see it at Georgia State every week.
Probably more than the average because so much stuff films downtown.
And we're very proud of that, of course. That Atlanta's able to get that notoriety and that attention.
All right, hang with us. We've got one more guest. Next up on the program, we've got Minal Patel. Welcome.
Hello.
So, Minal, you are an alum. You've lived through Georgia State, right? You went here?
Yes, I did. Class of 2006.
And then, so you liked it enough to come back and be part of this show?
I really enjoyed it. I think, a lot of what these gentlemen here are saying, being in the city, I've seen this university transform. I've seen the city transform, and a lot of it has to do with, my success, with what I was able to capture from here. And, I'm back. This is my contribution back, and, I think I found my next team right here.
There you go. There's a lot of brains, smart people in this room. Now, you're with MP Hospitality. Tell us about that. How are you serving folks?
So that is my company. We're going to, eventually launch that this year. But it is a combination of what I put together, which came to be all hospitality related. Out of school, I went to work. I was with Verizon Wireless for many years. My family's been in the hotel business, which is franchised. I grew up doing that. I felt the need to go out and venture, stay away from that, knowing that it was in my back pocket. So I went to work. Ironically, I went into the sales side of things, not realizing that I was good at sales, but I was taught. The great thing was that the company I worked for taught me a lot about multi-unit leadership. Part of that I learned here at State, and then I applied it when I went out into the field. And a lot of my contacts that I made here, helped me kind of merge a lot of my obstacles that I was running into when I went out there. Left there, got back to the hotel business, realized that I wanted to put my multi-unit leadership skills to work. And part of what Ben spoke about is, I looked at many franchises before I got into what I 100% do alone is I'm in the pizza business with Marco's Pizza franchising.
Mm-hmm. How'd you choose Marco's?
Well,
tell me about the whole process to choose anything.
Okay.
Like, so you had a blank sheet of paper, right? You could have picked anything?
Yes and no. Some of the things Ben said, for example, Chick-fil-A or a Domino's, there are certain guidelines that are maybe outside of reach for individuals, right? There may be a lot more involved. They don't just want your money. They want to know that you're going to be in the unit. That was a lot of weeding out there because the brands that we typically think of, we're like, okay, well, I'm going to save money. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to apply. And then you run into these roadblocks. And so then that filtered out a lot of guys.
So that kind of helped you force your hand a little bit and help you make a decision.
Then you move into a different pool. And then, again, you decide individually, what do I want to do? What type of lifestyle am I looking for? Do I want to be multi-unit? Do I want to be single, unit? Do I just want one shop and, that's going to be my end all and I want it to be in my neighborhood?
Right.
So all those factors contributed to directing me into, limited options.
When you first started, you started writing down, okay, this is my dream list, right? You had... What were some of the first names you wrote down of brands that you wanted to consider?
So for me personally, I looked at growth. I wanted to at least do 3 to 5 units. Based on my experience, I felt like that would provide not only the financial return that I was looking for, it would also allow me to build a team where I could ultimately hand that to somebody to run and then I oversee.
So you didn't want to be the one in the store in the neighborhood pizza place or the neighborhood location. You wanted something larger.
That would be my exit, but without selling, that would be my personal exit.
Right. And then so when you're attacking it that way, you need different things than you would if it was just your store, right? Like, you have to approach it differently. If it's you in a store, then you know you're going to be the one that's out there doing the work in that local community market. But if you're going to say, okay, I'm going to get 3 to 5, now I need a team of people, right? I got to find them. I have to attract them.
Right. So looking at, rents in certain neighborhoods, right? If I'm going to run it, I don't have to pay a GM.
Right.
Now my cost went down.
Right.
If I'm going to hand it off, what does labor look like in that neighborhood? What does turnover look like? What does the retail space look like? Is there anything available? So all those pieces, and again, then dealing with the different franchise companies, roadblocks that I ran into was, for example, I looked at Jimmy John's. I even looked at Subway. I looked at Your Pie, which is another pizza concept out of Athens.
Did you have some sort of Sherpa helping you think all this through, and like somebody guiding this process, or were you doing it kind of on your own?
Well, I made a lot of relationships when I was at Georgia State. And again, a lot of those young individuals, families come from businesses. So tapping into my resources that way, and with my parents, their associates, just picking brains.
Right.
But Ben wasn't here. You had to do this without Ben's counsel.
Sans Ben. There's life before Ben and life
Ben's
after
here.
Ben.
Ben's here now. Relax.
That's right. It's all going to be okay now.
Ben is here.
Yeah, I mean, I tell all my students that, when they're in the class, they learn something in the class, but the biggest thing about a school like Georgia State is you have access to that network of students that are going to be kind of the most important thing that you take forward with you in terms of understanding, how to succeed in business. And franchising, certainly there's a lot of individuals out there that will help you. And Minal is an example of someone that has come out of GSU, is an entrepreneur, and has used franchising as one avenue, not the only avenue for his entrepreneurial ventures, but one avenue. And he's right. Once you look at something, once you pick a business, you've got to think of, do I want to stay in Atlanta? Do I have to leave Atlanta to take this business opportunity? And I think Minal with Marco's picked a brand where it was a brand that fit his what his needs were at that time.
So now where are you at with Marco's right now?
I'm a 2-unit operator. I had 3. I sold one off. Again, it came back down to time and value. What am I getting? But I learned a lot. That location that I exited from was a failing store that I purchased, which again it kind of came to me. But I'm a 2-unit operator. I'm very content where I'm at with that. Part of my selection with Marco's was it's a growth company. Again, growth is not always good. I've seen it transition. The speed at which they're moving for a new entrepreneur or a new business owner might be very challenging because you don't have a say-so in it, right? Especially a 1-2 unit operator guy. It's like, here's what you're doing, here's the date. And you kind of run with that. And it can be difficult because entrepreneurs want that free, that kind of, free spirit mind, like, all right, here's what I'm going to do.
And then what have you learned? What are some of the good and the bad of what you've learned so far with Marco's?
With Marco's or franchising?
Well, we'll take Marco's because you're in it now, right?
Yeah, Marco's Pizza is great. I mean, part of my selection with that was that if I'm personally going to do something, right, in my mind, I have to be passionate about that product. And that's something that I think...
So you ate a lot of pizza?
I mean, I hope you do too.
I try to.
Pizza's good. Pizza's good, especially our pizza. It's fresh, right? Again, we make our dough in-house. That was huge for me. I was like, this is amazing. So now I can sell a product that I don't feel bad about with, the way people are eating these days. Yeah, it might be a little high on the calorie count, but it's fresh. So it gave me growth. It gave me options. I have a voice. I'm not just, a dot there. And I love the product. The product is great. I'm passionate about it. So when I speak to my team or we're educating ourselves on pizza, which I never thought I would be doing because, there's a way to sauce a pie.
There's a right way.
There's a right way. There's a wrong way. It affects the bake. I had to learn all this. I'm not a restaurateur.
Right.
But the big advantage of franchising, particularly in this QSR world, was lower investment. Ben talked about that because I'm young. I don't have all this money to throw around. So getting into it, it is riskier. But if you're in there, you learn. And one of the biggest things for me is, I thought about it many times. I said, well, I've learned that. Why don't I open up my own shop? Well, for an entrepreneur, especially in this day, the tools to go fund technology could be costly.
Right.
Buying into the ecosystem has allowed me to tap into their tools at a lot lower cost and use those.
Because they have economies of scale.
Right. So they have the economies of scale, and they have a corporate office doing all that work with our royalty dollars.
Right.
Which, as franchisees, we need to understand that.
Mm-hmm. And then you have to appreciate that and
Correct.
not take it for granted.
Appreciate it and use it. Something you stated earlier is, it's not, I'm going to build it out, put the sign up, and the doors are going to be flooded.
And it's an ATM machine. I just cash checks every week.
Right.
It's not.
That is something that, entrepreneurs and the franchise model, all that combustion together will create that success.
So now, what's been the most rewarding part for you?
Oh man, it is not easy by any means.
What about the leading and the seeing kind of the people step up and rise to the occasion and kind of help you?
So the support system that you build around your ecosystem, right? Which for me also is a huge benefit because I came to Georgia State.
Lean in there. Getting closer to the mic.
I came to Georgia State because we moved to Atlanta, and a lot of the contacts, resources in the hospitality department, I still reached out to them and said, hey, here's my issue. Boom, get an answer or create that system. I ran into Ben at a event for the DeKalb Chamber, and here we are, and we've talked about franchising and some of the things that I'm running to, what his outlook is. But my team, growing the team has been very inspiring because, at some point you make that turn and you say, all right, now I'm going to hire folks that are going to teach me. And that was massive. Mm-hmm. Was I'm not the smartest guy no more. Yeah, I got it open, but now I need to bring someone in to teach me how to get to the next level.
And then when you see that in action, you must be proud, right?
Yeah, when your sales grow and your margins start getting wider, it's a happy run to the bank.
So now, what's the ultimate dream?
The ultimate dream for me in this world is right now to put our hotel business, my restaurant side. I also do some real estate, buy and flip, renovate, apartments. Is to put all that under an umbrella and create some more support staff to where I can not be so hands-on. And I've already started that process because at some point you can only continue to be the glue that sticks everything together. Someone else has to be able to do that for me to then venture off and say, let's look at another deal. Because today I couldn't do that. I could, but I would be hurting all the other people. And for me and for other entrepreneurs to make sure that they are conscious and aware of that is huge. To say, hey, where am I? And really do a reality check. Where am I? Where am I today? How can I get there without just adding on stuff?
So now how do you have any advice for the entrepreneur when it comes to attracting talent? Like how do you find the right people that are right fits for the team?
So particularly today, that's a huge topic in our industry. I'm sure these gentlemen know with, employment the way it is, it's very difficult because everybody's throwing money out there at candidates. For me particularly, and with my colleagues, it is hire for attitude, train for skill. It's a lot. It's a little bit more work up front, and again, hiring people because they have this amazing resume or XYZ. put them into your system, and now you got to try to change that, and it always doesn't work that way. But keeping your eyes and ears open. I mean, someone doesn't have to be from pizza to be a pizza GM. I mean, look at me. I'm not a restaurateur, but I'm probably one of the better Marco's Pizza franchisees in the market. It's just, how open are you to change and adapt to what is really going on, not what you think is going on.
Now, what about looking back to your days at Georgia State? Do you have any advice for young people of how to get the most out of the Georgia State experience?
This campus has really evolved. I haven't been around much except for the past few months here with the warm welcome of Ben and the hospitality department. They have a lot of tools and resources here, a lot more than I did. And I would really, really spend time and poke around to all these different things that are happening, with the film industry the way it is, with music the way it is in Atlanta. I remember a lot of my colleagues when I was here, they were all interested in those things, right? Nobody was interested in franchising then, but now franchising is on the map, right? That's a great way for a entrepreneur to get their feet into something, have a support system, and be able to grow and develop some cash flow to then, maybe do something else with that. It doesn't mean that's the end all, but it is a huge avenue. And with the way franchising is going, like Ben stated, you can be in the chiropractic field and get into franchising. That didn't exist 10 years ago, right? You could be in the chair business and say, I have a passion for chairs. Guess what? You can be a chair distributor. There's a franchise for that.
Right.
So there's lots of things about franchising that we can educate ourselves on and really get into and create cash flow. And you don't need brick and mortar, right? That's the huge thing today versus when I was in school. You don't need brick and mortar. You can do everything from your cell phone. If you really want to hustle, you can get it done.
Now, Jeff and Ben, any advice for young people if they want to plug into the GSU ecosystem?
Well, one of the things I would add is that, Georgia State is going to be leading the way. They're launching a new initiative in the fall. Now, it's for accreditation purposes, which gets a little bit in the jargony weeds, but the university is launching a thing called a Quality Enhancement Plan, and its focus is on college to careers. So we're going to be, across all units in Georgia State, having a focus on making students connect and be aware of and demonstrate how they're learning career readiness, career competencies. So what skill sets are they learning in their courses that they can then apply in careers? And part of that, and one of the things that entrepreneurship and hospitality both is kind of already believes in, is sort of a portfolio approach to education, where students are able to document what they learned in their courses, how they're applying it. And so the idea that entrepreneurship, we very much believe in our courses that it's experiential, that one of the best ways students can learn entrepreneurship is by doing entrepreneurship. So a lot of our course projects are applied. They're actually creating real startups and really going to pitch competitions for real prize money. So these are the type of things that they can document to potential employers when you're looking to hire, that, hey, like, I took part in this pitch competition, or this is my skill set in this area. And so part of that as well is we early on have them do things like personality tests. Entrepreneur is one of the 16 personality types. Do you have certain skill sets that lend you to being an entrepreneur? Or, if it's a tech startup, they say hipster, hacker, or hustler, right? So are you on the business side? Are you on the design and creative side? So these are things that we're learning in our courses that then make students more marketable and help them identify potential career paths for them. And it may be not in a particular industry that they associate it with, like you're talking about, but say, hey, I have this skill set, this suits me in this particular job. So you're going to see more and more focus on that across the university and in general. E&I and hospitality and Robinson really believes in that as well, that what we're doing in the classroom has application and students can not only be aware of it, but demonstrate it and kind of take a lead role across the country in being able to do that.
And you're looking for businesses around town to partner with you, right? So that you can give the students the opportunity to kind of experience life in a startup or life in some of these small to fast-growing companies?
Yep. Absolutely. So they can, create their own startup, have a side hustle, go work in an existing company, all of these different skill sets.
But that helps build their portfolio.
Yep. Absolutely.
Now, Ben, are you looking for you want the whole franchise community here in Atlanta to get involved with the program in some way,
absolutely.
right?
I mean, I have guest speakers in my class almost every class have guest speakers come in to engage the students. I mean, that's the advantage of being in Atlanta. I lived in Ithaca for 6 years.
Right.
And
how many franchisors do you get in there?
Not many. The one thing I'll tell the students here at Georgia State to do is network. We have a lot of first-generation students that might not understand kind of the power of networking. The Cornell students I had were much more savvy in terms of understanding kind of how networks work, and they had much more social capital. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I tell my students to do is use your faculty members as a starting point,
right,
and connection point. Go meet with them. Engage with as many people as possible in the community. That's where a lot of the value comes from. Certainly you can learn things in the classroom, but one of the reasons you're here at Georgia State is to experience Atlanta. And so, when you're a student, people are willing to help you. It's much easier to get connections when you're a student, right, because people are there and they want you to succeed. So do that. Reach out to people. When you have a guest speaker in class, send them an email. If you want to work in a business and understand how it works, ask them for an internship. And use your faculty members as much as possible.
Now, Minal, for you, if somebody wanted to learn more about what you're up to, is there any coordinates? You want to share where your pizza places are? Do you want to give the coordinates of your hospitality firm?
Sure. I mean, if they want to reach out to me, definitely email would be the best way. It's minalap@gmail.com. We're in the process of getting the MP Hospitality umbrella buttoned up. So that's not currently live. So that would be the best way to reach me, minalap@gmail.com, or they can contact Dr. Lawrence here in the hospitality department. He will forward them my way. But one of my locations is the Marco's Pizza right by the Atlanta airport on Virginia Avenue. Mm-hmm. So that is it's actually one of the nicer locations. It's really nice. Check it out, guys.
All right. Well, thank you all for being part of the show today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All right, this is Lee Cantor for Stone Payton. We will see you all next time on Georgia State University's Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute radio show.